So let's get into it. Like we're in chapter one. We're in fucking world 1-1 right here. Okay, we're at the very beginning, and my goal with this is to give you a good, at least factual understanding of how the United States basically got to where we are today. So I'm gonna do something a little bit unorthodox because we're just the facts, man. That's what we're doing right here, and this is like the quick give you just the highlights. This is the red zone, and if you want to go back and look at Game Pass and actually like watch the game in detail, then you can actually go and read about, people are much more learned than I, whether it's even like John Green, like his like Crash Course is a great channel to actually learn about a bit more of the nitty gritty of history. Or then you could go even, like I talked about in the intro, a little deeper and go into something like Niall Ferguson and learn even from a incredibly well-educated, Oxford-educated scholar about the deeper intricacies of history, because it just gets deeper. But if you really just want the facts, ma'am, then that's what I'm here for, and that's what I can provide in fucking spades, dude. So I'm gonna skip, frankly, everything from about, like, we're gonna start in terms of this particular series about 1895 onward. I'll talk a little bit, as you'll see, a little bit before that, but frankly, like, how many times did we learn about all that shit in school? Like, I swear to God, I must have every history class I took in high school, because I majored in history in college, and you do learn, as you'd hope, a little bit more in college, but in literally in middle school through high school, I must have learned about the Pilgrims, the American Revolution, like good old GW crossing the Delaware, like slavery, obviously. The Civil War. I'm not like a huge Civil War person. Like, I'm like kind of like, there are people who love that shit. That's like, for me, it's just like a tragedy. And then they're like just the mustaches they were working with back then, just not gonna even try to cover it. So if you want to, like I said, if you want to hear about that, you'll have to, like, John Green has a fantastic channel called Crash Course where he goes through all of that and talks about all the implications of all that in much greater detail. So for the purposes of this channel, we'll be starting and dealing mostly with zeitgeist. Like, I'm all for big person history. I think that there's the great thing about history is there's the counterfactual. That's such a fun thing to consider. And if you're not an attorney, the counterfactual is basically, if there's a fact, what could have been the counterpart to that? Like, what if, so for example, if the Treaty of Versailles wasn't instituted and reparations against Germany weren't instituted, then would there have even been a World War II? Like, that's a counterfactual, is something that didn't happen in history, but something that very much could have happened in history, and looking at how that would have affected everything, the cause and effect of everything. Thesis, the crux of our question, is that we'll be exploring with this particular series. And we can, if you guys want to know more, if you guys want to learn about different things in history, then, feel free to drop some comments and some questions, and we can, explore those in other series. But for right now, we're going to answer how America came to power, what we can expect from the next Pax Americana. It's kind of a pretentious term, but I like it. It defines it pretty well. Like, there was a Pax Romana that lasted for about 200 years. And when the Romans, the Western Roman Empire controlled, it's called the Roman Peace. They controlled much of the known world at that point. I mean, that's kind of a Eurocentric thing to say, because, like, obviously the Chinese were doing real big things back then as well. But there was a Roman peace that lasted, and there is a Pax Americana, there's no doubt, in my mind. Let's start with the moment that the U.S. actually became a nationalist country, because that's like something that I feel like is not really well explained in schools, and I think this is something they should really, like, start with. But, like, nations didn't exist. Like nations, like the thing, like your globe, not just the physical globe, but the way that it's carved up did not exist. Like, and I'm not even talking about, like, oh, of course, like, nations that come, no, like, there were, like, empires. There were just, like, big swaths of land, and, like, no one really knew where it began or ended. Like, that's just That's just how it was. Like, it's like Egypt. Oh, like, what's Egypt? It's like, I don't know. Egypt's like that whole general area. Like, it's just like, oh, you're more or less in Egypt now, like ancient Egypt. Like, you're more or less in Rome right now, or like the Roman Empire. You're you're in the Roman Empire because like you'd run into a fucking centurion, but you wouldn't. It wasn't like there was like the signs like now entering like like the Roman Empire. It's just like we didn't have borders, and so it took us like a while to come up with that idea of like hard and fast borders. And we're going to dive a little bit and segue a little bit into this, which isn't necessarily U.S. history, but it's very important for this concept, was the 30 Years' War. And I'm not sure how many of you are even aware of the 30 Years' War. I don't think I'd be aware of it if I wasn't a history major, or at least vaguely involved in that type of study, which is kind of nutty because it's like the bloodiest, like one of the bloodiest and like little known conflicts in European history, which maybe just because American schools don't do a great job of teaching European history. Because like I said, we tend to, at least in my experience, teach the same like 5 periods over and over and over. We're like, yeah, the Pilgrims were super important, dummy important, bro. Like Pilgrims, dummy important. Like they're like not in the grand scheme of things. Like they were like, it's like, yeah, super like kind of interesting, but like fringe religious group that like fucked off the Holland and then like took a rickety ship to the New World, like, and then like hooray, like they ended up establishing a colony. Like Jamestown is arguably more important, but like I feel like I was taught that, and then the Revolution, and then like slavery and the Civil War, and then pretty much everything up to about World War I about 5 times. So no wonder we didn't get to European history. But it's like kind of the 30 Years' War is actually like super important because not the war itself, but just like the implications of it. And we'll get to that. But like to give you the quick view from a million feet. So as they did back in the day, the Catholic Habsburgs and the Protestant Estates of Germany. It wasn't necessarily Germany. It was like Germany used to be like Prussia and Bohemia and a lot of different, basically states, I guess you could call them. It was almost like the United States. There were a bunch of little like city states, almost like in Greece, like Sparta and Athens and Thebes. Like there was a bunch of like little municipalities basically that were in that area and had their own spheres of power, we'll say. So there was the Catholic Habsburgs, which, I mean, if you don't know who the Habsburgs are, like powerful, I guess you could say, royal family that spanned all throughout Europe in the medieval period. The Rothschilds are their descendants. So yeah, the Protestant estates of Germany, Sweden, Transylvania, etc. Yeah, Transylvania used to be a fucking powerhouse, I guess, right? So they're Protestant estates and Protestants and Catholics not getting along. You know, not really anything to be surprised about if you were to crack a textbook of anything in the medieval period and look at that. Yeah, Catholics and Protestants not really getting along. And just kind of beefing, man. They're not unlike the Democrats and Republicans today. Slightly less violent, because their differences aren't really that big, Like their differences are not that stark because, frankly, Catholics believed in scripture and tradition because the Catholic Church is a power structure and they want to make you believe in tradition. And the Protestants not so big on tradition, and they were kind of just like, hey, the written word's just kind of the vibe, and that's what we're going with. Not that the Protestants don't have their own. Like the Church of England's a Protestant church, and it's basically just Catholicism. But like, and Henry just wanted a fucking divorce. So like, not saying that like Protestantism isn't equally a power structure. It's just that they're not that different. They're not that different, and yet there's so much death and violence between the two just beefing with each other. And luckily, there isn't as much death and violence between Democrats and Republicans today, but equally, their differences are slight, and they both believe the other is the spawn of Satan. So yeah, just a good analogy there for the boys. The Catholics sent representatives. This is to set the stage for the 30 Years' War, not to not to just throw it into you. The Catholics sent representatives to see the Habsburgs in Prague, and that's where the Habsburgs were just fucking vibing with their boys. And the Catholics sent representatives there to discuss a couple things, but the most important issue, like for I guess for our purposes, were that there were serfs, and I guess I'll define it. I guess like so, serfs are just basically just the shittiest of the shit jobs, like worse than like Amazon workers. Like if you saw that fucking movie that won Best Picture, and I think it was last year or 2 years ago, that no one gave a shit about, the one about the Amazon worker, that I forget what it's called, but worse than that, worse than people living out of their vans because they are Amazon workers or whatever that movie was about. That was such an awful Oscar fucking season. But worse than that, serfs are worse than that, and they basically were worse than sharecroppers. Like the lords own the land and basically owned you, and you just had to work the land for the lord, and yeah, you just kind of had a shit life. And it was made even worse at this point in time because you were being taxed both by the Habsburgs, and these Protestants sent representatives to see the Habsburgs in Prague because both the Catholic Habsburgs, and the Protestants were both taxing the serfs. Obviously, the serfs weren't very happy about it, but really the meeting that the meeting in Prague was to solve who owned the serfs. Like, and I mean that literally, because like they were both getting annoyed at who should have the right to exploit these peasants. Like the landed gentry were getting annoyed at who had the right to actually tax these peasants who were working the land for them without being paid. They were subsistence farmers, so they worked the land and they took only what they needed to eat, and they gave the rest to their lords. And that's the way the news went. And so yeah, like whenever you get annoyed that like you have to reset your password or something just to get a reservation on OpenTable, and it's just super annoying because it goes to an email that you don't have the password for, and you have to reset that password too. Just put it in perspective, like. We live in pretty good times. Like at least you're not a fucking serf who was getting double taxed, and there were people, your lords were having a meeting about who was actually supposed to be exploiting you. We've come a long way. And so at this meeting in Prague, they chirped at each other for a little bit. And then the Habsburgs got like really, this is my favorite thing about history, is if you actually like, I don't know why they don't teach it this way in school. Like if you actually, they basically got to this meeting. I'm sure a bunch of boring shit happened. Like I read through it. Like this, like obviously there was a bunch of like annoying shit where they were talking about, like the Catholics should own this area and the Protestants should own that area. But basically what happened is the Habsburgs got like super annoyed at the Protestants, and they decided to defenestrate the representatives. And so defenestrate is not a word that I have come across before or since this event. And I think it pretty much was, I guess it was all the rage back in like the 15th century, specifically 1618. Defenestration was it's not so popular now, was all the fucking rage. Just one more time for the homies back home. The word is defenestrate. And it's the practice of when you just don't like someone, you should just like fucking throw them out a window, right? Like our windows today, not really made for defenestration. Yeah, not so much the rage anymore. Like now, I guess we just, we just Epstein people in prison or something. That's more the way we go about people we don't like. But yeah, so this maybe you could be more bold back then. Less cameras. But There are, in fact, three distinct defenestrations of Prague, not just three defenestrations. There were three distinct defenestrations of Prague recorded in history. This being the third and most important. So, the Habsburgs, who are Catholic, to remind you and just to remind myself, threw the Protestants out of the window of their castle. So they were a royal courtroom type thing, and they got really annoyed with the Protestants, and they literally threw them out of a third-story window of their castle, and the Protestants, defying all odds, survived a 70-foot fall, dude. A 70-foot fall from a castle window. Not even into water. If this wasn't like a Nick Cage situation in National Treasure, like our like fucking great movie, but it wasn't even that. Like he didn't jump off an aircraft carrier into water and then like, swam away or whatever. Like they survived a 70-foot fall from a castle window and lived to tell the tale. I've actually looked at the recorded sources on this, and like it isn't completely, we're not exactly sure how it happened. Obviously the Protestants were like claiming like, oh yeah, like the Virgin Mary, like they were saved by the Virgin Mary, like it was divine intervention. And then obviously the other side was like, oh no, they landed literally in a dung heap. That's what the Catholic Habsburgs said was, oh, they landed in like a dung cart, like a cart full of shit. That's how, because those existed back then. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine being that guy? Like that's your job. But so in any case, they survived this 70-foot fall from a castle window, like all of them. So like who knows? Like Assassin's Creed that shit, just like landed in like a hay bale or something, or dung heap, like whatever you want to go with, or the Virgin Mary, whatever floats your boat, dude. Like, and so that galvanized the countries for war, because obviously the surviving such a fall, the Protestants believed that God was on their side, and I guess the Habsburgs were just ready to go. They're ready to tax those serfs. And so I guess to fast forward now to the war itself. So the fast forward to the war itself, anywhere from 6 to 8 million people died, and this war resulted in a 50% loss in the population of some parts of Germany. So like just to give you like a good, I don't know, basis to like compare it to, because like honestly, when number as to quote good old Joe Stalin, dude, to quote good old Joseph Stalin, like at a certain point, like casualties just become statistics. Like it's hard to really even like wrap your brain around. Like okay, like obviously that's a lot of people, but like I'll give you a frame of reference. Like 8 million military combatants died in World War One. That's not to say like this war was nowhere on the scale of World War One. I don't want to like mislead you with statistics, but because 20 million people died in World War One, that's including military and civilian combatants. This was 6 to 8 million estimated people died in this particular war. That includes military combatants and civilians. Back in the day, that was a much greater part of the population. Like that was 6 to 8 million people total died as a result of this conflict, estimated. And as I said, that was estimated to be a 50% loss in the population in some parts of Germany. 50% loss. And yet, like as I said, there's not many people who really know much. Maybe Europe is better, but there's not many people in America, I think, who would even be able to vaguely come up with this concept or even know about this war. So yeah, that was, it was a big conflict. It was a big fucking war over taxes and Protestant and Catholicism. So fun stuff. But the whole point of telling you about this, besides the fact just that it was, it's super interesting, is that it resulted in the Peace of Westphalia, during which Germany and Central Europe, so as I said, like Sweden and like Transylvania and like obviously like all the different parts of Germany, like we're not going to get into right now, but like Prussia, Bohemia, like all the different parts, they all agreed on strong borders for their nations and nation states. So like that was the big thing that came out of this conflict. is that finally the elite had agreed on basically what serfs belonged to who, and they went along happily exploiting their populations until around 1790 when the French Revolution occurred. And we can go on, obviously, huge implications about the French Revolution, like that was kind of the almost towards the death knell of the monarchy, and like this a whole swaths of things happen. And, you know, you can attribute that back to like Thomas Locke and Voltaire and just like those, like that's a whole, the Enlightenment, like there's a whole another, like we can go into that at a much later date, or if that's something you guys are interested in, then we can talk about that at some point. But that's for the purposes of this particular series to stay on course. That was the point of this giant war, was that it resulted in the Peace of Westphalia, which basically everyone agreed in Europe on strong borders for their nations. So that was like the first step towards like nationalism and nationhood. And so what does this have to do with the US? So like I said, that all happened like mid 15th century, we'll say. And so in the late 19th century now, so we're talking about the late 1800s, like a new fad was sweeping the world. And this fad was called nationalism. And like basically it was why, like I said, empires were the fucking shit, dude. Empires were, if you had an empire, it was blue check mark verified. You're an absolute stud. Okay, dude. And if you're the Ottoman Empire, like the Roman Empire, like even, I don't even know if they call it the Chinese Empire, but the Chinese dynasties, I guess they call them, like if that was the thing, right? And nationalism was the new thing. Like if you had a nation, like you are now blue check mark verified, like we're like, get rid of those fucking boomers. We are the way forward. And now we had presidents, now we had nations. Like we had monarchs, we had empires. Now we have presidents and we have nations. And so while Otto von Bismarck was busy just uniting Germany, like Germany, as we just talked about, being fucking ravaged in like the 1600s, like he was the guy to be like, all right, like Prussia, you make dope troops, like Bohemia, like he just started uniting like all of these different tracts of Germany into the united Germany that we know today. Like, and that's like the interesting thing that I think a lot of people don't know, is that like it wasn't that recent that like Italy used to be a loose collection of a bunch of random ass states. Same with Germany. Like they were a loose collection of random states that like all kind of vaguely cooperated with each other, but they were their own municipalities. And so like he was the first one to basically, in Germany, to be clear, to be like unite Germany into one nation. And like it was a brand new thing. And the US we were engaged in our own nation building. Like we were basically like not something to necessarily be proud of, but we were taking just the best tracts of land for ourselves and absorbing it into our own nation. Like we had the 13 colonies and we started building that out, dude. Like we started like a good startup. We started just building out. We got we had the Louisiana Purchase from the French. We started exploring like, what the fuck is all this? And then we were like, oh, it's a bunch of Native Americans. Like, just like we discovered in the 13 colonies, there are people living here. And so not necessarily for, not our proudest moment, but this is known as manifest destiny that, in the mid 1800s, we had this belief that, I guess by we could just say the American elite, I don't know, like the government at the time, believed that we needed to bring America as far west as possible because that's what God wanted. But basically, we just built some railroads, and we moved the Native Americans onto reservations, and killed a lot of them, and stopped them from expressing their culture. And that was not. I think as Americans, we can accept that this is our history and this is what happened, and we need to accept it and not be proud of it, and you know, embrace it to a certain degree, not like in a good way, but you know, be properly ashamed of what happened, and to be able to move forward and understand that this is where we're coming from. This is our birthright in a certain way. This is what happens. And, you know, not necessarily even coming from a place of judgment, but this is accepting that this is what happened. And so, yeah, moved all the Native Americans onto reservations, kicked the shit out of Mexico, and took a lot of Texas. You know, the Alamo. I'm sure you've all heard about yes, that was a battle during the Mexican-American War where they completely outnumbered us. And yes, we hunkered down, Daniel Boone, the whole thing in the Alamo, got our shit rocked in the Alamo, became this great, you know, story of courage. And then we did, and we went back and kicked the shit out of the Mexican army. Like, that's like Mexico as a whole. It was a whole thing. There were nations and there were armies. Everyone was fighting for territory. Like, it was the beginning of a Civ game. Like, that's where we were. And so yeah, like, we eventually, basically the continental United States as we know it today, we carved it out. Like, that's how life was. Like, there were people, you know, settlers moved out west in search of a better life, in search of gold rush, in search of, you know, whatever, like the American dream, essentially. Immigrants, the whole 9 yards. So as the world celebrated the 20th century, the U.S. essentially as a whole, like, took a victory lap. You know, like, we had solidified a continental United States. We're large as fuck nation, dude. We're a large half nation. And people began to see the U.S. This kind of came about at the end of the Civil War, but people began to see the U.S. not as a loose collection of nation states that vaguely kind of cooperated with each other. It was more, you know, it was more like a nation. It was, as you'd say, a nation under God, indivisible, all that jazz. People began to say the United States is versus the United States are, which may not seem like a big disparity, but it really, it was a big deal. Like, it was like, oh, this is a nation. This is a country. Like, that's what this is. So we're going to briefly talk about the Monroe Doctrine, which, not sure if, you guys know about it, but it was issued in the wake of the War of 1812, which gave us the national anthem. That is dope. Like, our national anthem, like, probably top 10 of national anthems. Like, oh, Canada's, like, okay, like, not huge on it. I like England's. You know, God Save the Queen's pretty, you know, it's pretty good, but like, we obviously took that in, even like have our own lyrics, like America the Beautiful is pretty fucking great. So we kind of even took that one. But so yeah, our national anthem was pretty good. That came out of it. But really, it's the only war that, like, we don't really like to talk about. I don't even know if it was really taught that well in school, probably on purpose, because we got our asses handed to us by Canada. I mean, I guess you could say it was the British at the time, but yeah, it was Canada. Like, we tried to invade Canada and, like, kind of near the Great Lakes region, and didn't go well for us. Did not go. Once again, if you want to learn more about that, feel free to drop a comment or a link or something. Maybe I'll do a whole series about that. But yeah, like, they did not go well, to the point where the British got all the way to Washington, D.C. and burned down the then White House. And Dolly Madison, you know, fucking Dolly Madison, absolute queen, saved a portrait of George Washington in the White House, the then White House. The British got there, marched over there, and burned that shit to the ground. So once again, not something we really like to talk about. Probably, like, you know, you can say we lost Vietnam or something, but like, this was like it was like, did we? I don't know. Like, this is much more of like, oh yeah, we got our shit rocked. But the Monroe Doctrine, which was released in the wake of the War of 1812, mostly because the British couldn't wage war with us anymore because they were busy dealing with, like, Napoleon. So the Monroe Doctrine basically drew a circle around everything in the Western Hemisphere And we were just like, hey, this is ours now. Don't fuck with it. And yeah, since Europe was dealing with Napoleon, they were like, okay. They were just kind of like, they're just down for it. You know, obviously it's more complicated than that, but like for all intents and purposes, this is our sphere of interest, quote unquote. And, you know, don't fuck with it. This is ours. So, you know, obviously we didn't have a choice, but we were just like, yeah, if you want to keep your colonies, that's fine. But from now on, this is us. This is ours now. This is America. And, America. So back to the dawning of the 20th century, you know, 1900, like hooray. It was a time that the U.S. began to cultivate its brand. Like we got super into our brands, right? Like before Twitter, before all of that, the U.S. was the original getting super into its brand. And we began projecting, which is kind of rich, but we began projecting an image of moral superiority. Like, we did end up getting rid of slavery much later than Britain or France or any of those countries. And we, you know, we had subjugated our native population, but we began projecting an image of moral superiority. And as the economy began to grow and thrive, because we were a big nation with a lot of great resources and, you know, many policymakers and private citizens alike, as, you know, land of opportunity, began to look for a situation in which the U.S. could flex its newly found muscles on a global stage. So we had essentially figured out all of our domestic issues, you know, for better or worse, as I have said. We began to look beyond our own newly found borders. And so a minor conflict in Cuba proved to be our chance to actually begin to, you know, show the world what we could do. So Spain at the time, which, dude, just like R.I.P. Spain, like great, you know, great place now, but like Spain used to be the fucking one of the superpowers of the world. Dude, the Spanish Armada, like the gold, the colonies that they had, they were on track for it all, you know? And they like if Kanye were to, not that I even want to give Kanye any clout right now because he's a nut job, but like if he were to come up on stage and like steal the mic from Taylor Swift, like Spain had one of the best albums of all time. Like and just like Kanye, Spain is now going down like in flames in this period in history. So Spain owned Cuba and as a colonial possession. And the Cubans just wanted to smoke cigars and eat plantains and, you know, without the Spanish in their lives. Like they really were just all about living their lives without the Spanish. And they were kind of like, can you go? And the Spanish were like, nah, B. Like we is our colonial possession. Like, we're just going to vibe out here. We're making a lot of money. Like, we're not. Like, I'm not about it. And so they started beefing. They started fighting around 1868. And the U.S. was, like, watching this because Cuba obviously is, like, mad close to the U.S. And they were like, I mean, Spain. Like, you really are kind of being an asshole here. Like, I mean, the Cubans have made it very clear to you that they want to be free, like us. Like, I mean, we, as the U.S., are free. We're, like, the most free that has ever been free. We kick the fuck out of Britain. It's only right that they kick you out. Like, why? Like, they're trying to just vibe out, dude. And the Spanish were like, bro, didn't you just massacre the native population and you still treat your minorities like shit? And the U.S. was like, dude, Spain, this is why no one likes you, right? Like, I mean, like, you're just being a buzzkill here. Like, you have to bring that up. And they just want to smoke the Cubans just want to smoke their cigars and eat their plantains and, like, make Cuban sandwiches in peace without you. Like, they've made that clear. And you're just still encroaching on their territories. And, yeah, that's basically how the rhetoric went. And so after a lot of yellow journalism, which I'm not actually going to go into, like, too much here, basically it was, like, kind of, you know, sensational journalism. So I guess, you know, it wasn't, you know, propaganda isn't unique to, or sensational, you know, clickbait isn't, unique to today's era. Like there was yellow journalism was essentially the clickbait of the day, which is basically just like sensational news stories that were run in like a lot of the newspapers of the day. For example, if I know that you have half to seen this. If you see extra, extra, like read all about it. That was because you had a morning newspaper, you had a nightly newspaper, and if there was an extra, extra, it was because a news story had happened, and they printed an extra version, an extra newspaper for you to read all about it. As you would see, extra, extra, read all about it. That's what that was. It's an extra. It's a fun fact for you next time you're at a bar trivia. You get number one with get that gift card to whatever bar that you're doing the the trivia at. So after a lot of yellow journalism, the U.S. decided to engage in some good old fashioned dick swinging, which you gotta love some good old fashioned dick swinging, bro. With the blessing of William McKinley, President William McKinley, who was assassinated like later on, but I feel like for whatever reason it didn't make him cooler or more well known. I feel like everyone, for obvious reasons, knows like Lincoln or like knows that like Reagan was trying to be assassinated, but for whatever reason, like William McKinley, like also like kind of not equally dope, but like. Still, I feel like you got to be doing something right if people are gunning for you. Not really well known, I feel like. And so with his blessing, we that's a shout out to William McKinley right there. Like, I hope you get the respect you deserve. We sent a few of our state-of-the-art battleships into Havana Harbor. So these babies at the time were top of the line, these battleships. They were just like, they were made out of metal, like huge, huge thing made out of metal, and ran on this dope ass stuff called coal. I'm sure you know about coal. We're trying to get rid of it in today's day and age, but at the time, top of the line, And in April of 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor. So the Maine was like this brand new, top of the line, made out of metal, ran on coal battleship, and all the newspapers, the morning, night, and the extra edition, they ran these stories saying that it was sabotage, it was a Spanish mine, and this became a rallying cry for us to enter into the war with Spain, against just declare war on Spain. And if you are wondering, it wasn't Spanish saboteurs, and it was not a Spanish mine. It was coal dust in the furnace that caused the whole ship to explode, because coal is kind of volatile, and there was a lot of dust in the furnace room, and it caught, and it caused the whole kind of like a powder keg just to fucking explode. But never, according to Shock Doctrine, great book, never let a good crisis go to waste. So I guess to fast forward quickly through this war once again, if you want to learn more about it, USS Maine, I guess the Spanish-American War, there are plenty of amazing sources. There's so much incredible history to get through. To fast forward through this war, here are the facts. The U.S. had some dope shit. We fuck with me. It was the epitome of the more you fuck around, the more you're gonna find out. And the U.S. was desperately waiting for someone to fuck around. And so we had these state-of-the-art battleships, which, while prone to blowing up randomly, they were at least metal. They were made out of metal. And the Spanish were still using wooden ships. And you can imagine how that went, because gun to a knife fight doesn't really even cover it as an analogy, because we the United States had discovered this when the Union and the Confederates were fighting each other, and we developed the Confederates developed the Virginia, which was a ironclad, and the Union developed the Monitor, which was an ironclad. It looked more like a submarine. But yeah, they were made, or at least fitted, out of iron, and they basically tried to fire cannonballs at each other and nothing happened. And the Monitor steamed into our harbor and blew up all these Confederate wooden ships. And that was kind of the end of wooden ships, because an entire armada of wooden ships couldn't take out a single ironclad. So I guess the Spanish didn't get the memo. And yeah, that was kind of how it went. Like, much of the, at least naval war, is that we had the state-of-the-art battleships, which were at least 10 times more dope than the Monitor was. And the Spanish just had these wooden ships. And so while the war had generally been, quote unquote, about Cuba, the U.S. also sent a couple of those dope battleships into Manila Bay in the Philippines and was like, I'm just gonna, this is mine now. Like, we put in a Trader Joe's. It's pretty cool. like they just fucking just copped it. And, by the time the Spanish finally called uncle, like we had taken Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines from them. They were colonial possessions that we just took from them. And Puerto Rico, of course, Puerto Rico and Guam are still are to this day. In the Philippines, we have military bases there. But hey, at least Cuba can now smoke their cigars and eat their plantains and make dope sandwiches in peace. You ever had a Cuban? It's fucking phenomenal. Like, that's what we fight for, right? Like the conflict only lasted for 4 months, like the actual Spanish-American War, and it's generally glossed over in history. Like, I didn't learn about it until college, because I feel like a lot of history teachers go right from Reconstruction, which apparently is like it's important. I think the counterfactual is frankly more important than Reconstruction itself. Like, Reconstruction can be solved in a sentence, like, not good. Like, you had Lincoln, who had this plan for Reconstruction where it was like basically the smart thing that we should have done in the Treaty of Versailles. Like, he was like, hey, like, yes, the Confederates were a bunch of douchebags, but like, we should not make it difficult for them to reintegrate into the Union. Like, that's not going to be a good look for us. Like, we want, we want one America. We want the United States R. And then obviously he got assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. And then you had Andrew Johnson, who was a tailor from the South. And he was kind of, not to speak too ill of Andrew Johnson, because he became president and I'm not. So obviously he accomplished plenty in his life, but he was kind of like insecure about his position in society, I think, especially back in the day, because he was a tailor, as I said, in the South. And it's kind of like the idea of like white backlash, if like you don't want minorities to be more successful than you are. And he really was like kind of about a hard line Reconstruction. So I guess not to get too bogged down in the details that aren't necessarily important for this timeline, but Reconstruction is important. But I think that would be much more important to discuss, is that like Reconstruction could have been much better, where we not only properly integrated the angry white Southern population, but we also properly integrated the newly freed African American population properly into the Union. And if Lincoln had survived, I think it would have been much different. And due to the fact that he didn't, we had a president who frankly was a bit more racist, and which allowed for things like Jim Crow to even occur in the South. And, maybe it would have happened anyway. That's the whole point of the counterfactual, is you don't know. But the fact that you had one president who had a specific agenda, and you had another president, because the first one was assassinated, who had a completely different agenda, it's safe to assume that there would be a significant difference based on the disparity of those two agendas. So I wish that was taught a little bit more in school. But a lot of history teachers go right from Reconstruction to the Gilded Age and then World War One. But the Spanish-American War, even though it only lasted 4 months, was actually a pivotal conflict because it set the stage entirely for the 20th century, because it set the stage for the alliances of World War One and World War Two. So, first off, as I said, Spain used to be on top. At the end of it, they were just like, they're just not a superpower anymore. Like they were the light heavyweight champion of the world, and they got knocked the fuck out. Like they just didn't train for the bout. And specifically, the Battle of San Juan Hill, on a military engagement, was memorable. And so here we go with a little bit of big man history. Teddy Roosevelt. That's, you might remember him from Night at the Museum if you're a cultured individual, and he was a Rough Rider, and he led a battalion. This is before he's president, before Panama Canal, before like some dope speeches, before he got shot in the chest, but the bullet was stopped by a notebook, and he finished the speech like a fucking G, dude. He had that dog in him. Like, he was a Rough Rider, and he led a battalion up San Juan Hill to take an important position that was shelling artillery at the battleships in the harbor. And it was fucking dope what he did. But our army, frankly, lost a bunch of really good dudes that were still, like, we were wearing super heavy jackets in this tropical climate, and we lost a whole bunch of people. And even though it was, like, this incredible feat that we pulled off, the Germans, right? I was talking about them, like Otto von Bismarck, Prussia. They had this dope military, like A1. That is A1 military at this point. They had already successfully become a nation state. They had the best army in the world at that point. They were numero uno. Thanks to a bunch of emperors called Friedrich and Wilhelm, and Friedrich Wilhelm, and I'm not kidding. Like, they literally mashed the names together when they read. They were like, ooh, he's going to be Friedrich, and he's going to be Wilhelm, and then he's going to be Friedrich Wilhelm, and then they put symbols after their names. Like, I'm not fucking kidding. But essentially, Prussia became the #1 military in the world. And besides the fact that they were really well disciplined and they were really well incentivized, they also had Mauser rifles at the time, which were, state of the art. Not to get too bogged down in details, but best in the world. And so the Germans showed up. Not all of them, obviously. They sent a couple of spies just to check out, how America was getting on in their, dick swinging, we'll say. And the British also showed up. And so the Germans looked at the Battle of San Juan Hill and were like, oh, these guys are fucking pathetic. Like, these guys can't even take this hill. They don't have Mauser rifles. They're wearing super heavy clothes in this tropical climate. They're not well disciplined. Like, we don't have to worry about them. And the British, though, because the British, little island, big empire, like, showed up and were like, those are some nice boats, Daddy. And that's basically why it was so important, because I feel like we talked about it a lot in this particular episode, but to recap, I suppose, borders are very important, and they came about due to the Peace of Westphalia, and the U.S. got, because of that, because we wanted borders and we wanted nations, the U.S. got swept up in the fad of nationalism. And then they really wanted a few islands. We were like, not only do we want nationalism, we want islands. Like, everyone's got islands. We want some of our own. So then we took them. We took some islands. We took Guam. We took Puerto Rico. We took the Philippines. And that was, the light heavyweight champion. We took the belt. We took the fucking belt from Spain. And then Germany saw the Battle of San Juan Hill and was like, you're not that guy, pal. You're not. Trust me, you're not that guy. And so yeah, that's kind of Germany didn't really respect us after that because we weren't we weren't that guy in their eyes. But England was like saw our navies or our battleships, saw us steaming into the Philippines and fucking over the Spanish Navy to the point of there was one battle where we had one casualty of a Marine who passed out from heat exhaustion. And they had over 350 casualties. That's how bad it was. So England was like, okay, US, go off. Like, we have a bad boy king. And Germany was just like, yeah, you're not that guy. But so when World War I rolled around, we knew exactly where everyone was standing. And then that's where we're going to pick up next week. So I'm excited to continue the series and talk through it with you guys.